Well, hi everybody, my name is Steve Strand. I'm the Executive Director for the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs, or WASPC. We are asking specific questions centered on public safety to each of the top 4 polling candidates for governor of the state of Washington in 2024. And this is one of those segments. The same questions were sent ahead of time to each of the 4. They're going to get the exact same questions, but again, we just want to center on public safety issues, which is a big issue for everybody around our state. This segment features Senator Mark Mullet. He is a Democrat from Issaquah. Welcome. Thank you, Senator.
Hey, glad to be here.
Let's jump right in if we could. We're 51st in the nation, as I think everybody knows, in staffing in the state of Washington. Last. It has been that way for well over a dozen years in the state of Washington. As governor, what specifically would you do to address the staffing crisis in public safety, to improve public safety, to better serve victims? And sort of a follow-up to that is to ensure that law enforcement officers feel comfortable and supported in doing their jobs.
Yeah, I think for me in the Senate this past session, I actually had a bill. Obviously everyone trains in Burien at the Criminal Justice Training Academy. Going back to the 2008 recession, we used to make cities and counties chip in to pay part of that training cost. That wasn't the case pre-2008. And so I'm looking at the fact that we're so short-staffed, like we have to right-size the police force. So I had a bill to say, hey, how about the state picks up the entire cost of going to Burien to get trained? And we did get that finally after 15 years. That was in the budget that passed this March, where for the first time the state's back to picking up 100% of those costs. I think we just have to the cities and counties are out of money. Like the state budget, when I got elected back in 2012, was $34 billion. Now it's $72 billion. We have revenue growth at the state level. We need to step up and be a financial partner with cities and counties to help them right-size their police force. I had a separate bill this last session, which I would love to make governor request legislation, Senate Bill 6272, I think, where we actually use the cannabis tax revenue. It's just going to the general fund. It's not going to anything specific. The whole point of that is we're supposed to be supporting cities and counties at the local level to move the needle on public safety. And so the bill that I sponsored this last session, that money would get pushed out to jurisdictions, not as a blank check. It would get pushed out if they're willing to hire police officers, are willing to invest in like the court system. Like the whole thing has to work. And then I think the final piece is you just have to push back. You know, in Senate Ways and Means, like we've had attempts, people want to get rid of qualified immunity. I'm like, that is not going to make it easier for us to hire and retain police officers if we get rid of qualified immunity. And at the same time, we've had attempts to create like independent prosecutor groups to specifically go after police officers. And I keep explaining to my colleagues, I'm not supporting these bills because any law we pass right now that makes it harder to attract and retain our current workforce and law enforcement, this is not the time to pass it when you're 51st in the country. And so to me, this is a real strong message. I tried to explain to my colleagues, and I am optimistic. You get the right leadership in the governor's office, you can move the needle, and you just need a governor who's going to verbally say, I appreciate the sacrifices the law enforcement community is making on our behalves on a daily basis, putting their life on the line. I go back, I did a ride along in Spokane last September, and even when we were interacting with people where they weren't physically threatening us, I could tell they were high on something. And I was surprised. I told my wife how nervous it made me just being in that situation, even when we weren't being threatened, just the fact that you're interacting with somebody who clearly is not in a normal state of mind, that it made me a lot more sympathetic to the difficult job law enforcement officers have of having to make split-second decisions with people who you know are not in the right state of mind.
It's a perfect segue to our second question, which is sort of that intersection of behavioral health, addiction, criminal justice. Much of what we're seeing in terms of public concern and sort of what you just referred to is about that intersection, which includes homelessness, by the way. And it all relates to a lack of that, first of all, a lack of consequences. A lot of people feel there's a lack of consequences for criminal behavior, but secondly, also too few resources for behavioral health and addiction. So, I'd also mention that includes moving the fact that in our state we've moved drug offenses from sort of the superior court level to underfunded local courts as well, which is a problem. So do you, first of all, agree that accountability structures are insufficient, consequences are insufficient for some criminal behavior? And then really the big global question is, and it's a huge question, what is a high-performing system for criminal justice, behavioral health, addiction, what does it look like? I mean, if we did this right, what does that look like?
Yeah. I mean, I go back to the Blake decision, 2021. I was the most vocal Senate Democrat saying, this is going to be a disaster if we don't fix it. And so we passed what I think was a horrible Band-Aid bill in 21, that simple misdemeanor. I was a co-sponsor and champion of finding that bipartisan solution for Senate Bill 5536 to make sure we had accountability for public drug use. So, it's a gross misdemeanor. I worked with Republicans because they wanted a felony. I said, I can't get the votes on my side if we demanded a felony. We go to gross misdemeanor, I'm going to lose the far left of my caucus who wants to decriminalize drugs, but I can find the votes and we can work together. And I was really proud of what we did with Senate Bill 5536. But I think the missing link is secure substance abuse treatment facilities. I think the challenge now is, because of Senate Bill 5536, we can arrest someone using drugs in public. We don't want them to spend a year in jail. We want them to get treatment, but you send them to a treatment facility, and our belief in our state is treatment only works if you're ready for it. So the front door is unlocked, they turn around and leave, and then you have that exact same person on the street a week later. And so I don't feel like if you want to self-enroll yourself in a substance abuse treatment facility, that should be unlocked. But if you're now been arrested using drugs in public, like, we should be putting those people into secure substance abuse treatment facilities. I don't know if they're in there for 30, 45, or 60 days, but to me, the only compassionate thing we can do is give them the best chance to beat their addiction. We should not be spending one single taxpayer dollar to enable people to continue using drugs. But any jurisdiction wants to help people beat their addiction, we should be the financial partner for that jurisdiction to say, hey, we're going to help you beat drug addiction. We will step up and be your financial partner so you can actually give people the chance to do that. I think going forward, it'll look a lot better. On that mental health side, I'm always looking for solutions that don't involve just raising more taxes.
Right.
I chair the state construction budget. The solution I've really focused on is partnering with these tribal behavioral health facilities because they don't get reimbursed at Medicaid. Medicaid reimbursement means we got to pony up tens of millions of dollars to run these facilities. Mm-hmm. You get reimbursed with Bureau of Indian Affairs rates. It's 5 times higher than Medicaid rates. Mm-hmm. All we have to do is step up and help them build the facilities. They're open to everybody. That's the way these work. Even though they're tribal run facilities, they are open to every resident in the state of Washington. We have 39 federally recognized tribes. Like, we funded in my capital budget this last year 7 or 8 of these new facilities. Like, we got to build 39 of them. Mm-hmm. And we got to get them up and running as quick as we can and really expand that access to mental health treatment. And at the end of the day, you go back, our current cannabis tax revenue, it's $480 million. We're sharing 20 out of that 480. My goal as governor is we're going to keep every budget pushing out more and more of that money to local jurisdictions who are willing to be our partner on the public safety front. So we have accountability. We have to have accountability.
So just to be clear, the accountability piece, and I just want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly, is linked to what can potentially be addiction treatment. And we do have a strong civil liberties bent in this state, always have, where people are unwilling to have what you refer to as a secure treatment facility. And that is a substantial change. And when you're answering the question about a high-performing system, the system, what I'm hearing you say is it combines the consequences, the accountability with security, as you said, so people just can't walk out the front door.
Yes.
Am I hearing that right?
That's 100% correct.
Okay.
So you have step up with your tribal partners to move the needle on mental health access. Step up for people who are using drugs in public to say, hey, we're going to get you into a treatment program that we actually think has a high degree of you beating your addiction, not just checking a box saying we're good human beings. We put them in a substance abuse treatment facility knowing full well they're going to walk out the door a day or two later. And so to me, this is the change we need to strive for in the state of Washington. And that system, I think if you have that system in place for a year or two, I think 3rd Avenue in downtown Seattle will look drastically different than it does today. If everybody using drugs in public, and I don't think you're going to you're not going to have a free adult problem. Everyone's coming here to get free services. If we become known as a state where if you're using drugs in public, we get you treatment to beat that addiction, I'm happy to have that label. I'm happy to be that state, but I do not want to be a state that's enabling people to continue to use drugs in public.
Okay, thank you. Let's talk about pursuits. Pursuits obviously have been a hot topic for a long time, actually 3-4 years. it's been a focus of legislation since 2021 when there were substantial changes to the pursuit law. And with the recent passage of Initiative 2113, which started as a citizens initiative in the state of Washington, do you believe that more needs to be done through legislation or regulation on the issue of pursuits? As we're sitting here today, it is now back to a more discretionary policy, which the legislature passed after that initiative. Would you introduce, support, or sign into law as governor a bipartisan measure that actually was in front of the Senate last year to increase sentencing, seizures of vehicles, use of technology to make it so pursuits aren't the only option for people who elude police? And do you have anything to say, this is a tough question, but do you have anything to say to crime victims whose offenders have been fleeing over the last few years because law enforcement has been so limited in their response option?
Yeah, I mean, I think the bill you referred to, correct, it's Senate Bill 1600. I'm a co-sponsor of that bill.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at that bill's co-sponsor list, you're gonna see Mark Mullet on the list.
Mm-hmm.
So 100% yes, like I co-sponsor that bill because I 100% feel yes, we need to have as many tools that are, at our disposal and use as we can possibly have. I just think it's been, I'm so sympathetic. I think I was the most vocal Democrat in the legislature saying we should pass this police pursuit initiative. This is good public policy. You go back to the 22 session, there was a chance to have a floor vote on the floor of the Senate. I was the only Senate Democrat who actually broke with the party and said, I don't care how we're supposed to do this right now. I agree with my Republican colleagues that this police pursuit bill deserves an up or down vote today, right now, on the floor of the Senate. And I had political ramifications for me doing that. I was the only one of 29, but that is how strongly I felt the legislature had to fix the mess that was created during the 2021 session. And what I'd say to these victims is, we're gonna make mistakes. People make mistakes. The most important thing is we have to have the intellectual honesty to admit, as the government, as the legislature, when we've screwed up, raise our hand and say, we screwed up, we're now gonna fix it as quick as we can. And I fought tooth and nail to try to get that fixed in the 22, and then 23, we got a half fix, I would say, in that 23 session. I had to go door to door to my Senate Democratic colleagues, because Andy Billick says, we didn't get the bill out of committee. He said, I'll pull the bill out of committee, but I need to know that 15 out of the 29 Senate Democrats are gonna support doing that. And so that became my job, to go find those 15 signatures so I could go to our majority leader, Andy Billick, and say, yeah, the majority of our caucus wants to pull that bill that did not come out of the Law and Justice Committee and give it an up or down vote on the floor of the Senate. And that's how we finally got that bill passed. But I was fully supportive of us doing the initiative because it's a lot better bill than the one we passed in the 23 session. And all I can say to those victims, it's rough. I know we had that case in Clark County. It's just,
right.
This is why leadership matters. Like, you gotta be able to admit if you get something wrong, and you gotta fix it as fast as humanly possible.
Right. Thank you, Senator. So, since the implementation of House Bill 1140, this was also another bill that came out of the 2021 session regarding juvenile access to attorneys. Law enforcement has reported a lot of problems with attempting to work with juveniles. The idea of that bill was to make sure that juveniles they were aware of their rights, and I think everybody agrees with that. It was a well-intentioned bill, but the way it was written was really problematic. And law enforcement's reported a lot of problems in working with juveniles, both as offenders and as victims and witnesses of crimes. Current state law requires law enforcement to contact legal counsel on the juvenile's behalf before they can take any voluntary statement or evidence from a juvenile. There have been a lot of unintended consequences from that bill, such as homicides, including one in West Seattle, that cannot be further investigated because of prohibitions on talking to juveniles. The effect has been really to have a de facto bar on talking to juveniles at all, even as witnesses sometimes in cases, and it really hasn't served justice very well. That's my opinion. Would you support changes to that statute? It's a little bit inside baseball, but it's a big deal in terms of violent juvenile crime right now. So, what's your sense?
100%, I would support changes.
Okay.
I mean, you look at what just happened in Garfield High School. So here you have, they're trying to figure out what the hell happened. Like, this was what I found shocking, because I was traveling out of the state last year, Eastern Washington, rural Western Washington. I have not found one single time where they've called that attorney's line and said, can they talk to the officer? We don't, even if they're like, we don't think this person's involved in the crime, but we want to know what they saw. Not one single time has the attorney said, yes, you should talk to the officer. Like you just described, like, this system is so fundamentally broken. I think when the bill passed, people were like, oh, it'd be nice, because the lawyers can kind of find out like what level of involvement they had and if they had any risk of maybe being liable. But no, that's not what the lawyers are advising the juveniles. It's just a blanket, don't talk. And so to me, the fact that we basically, and this is a self-inflicted wound. I mean, this goes like to the police pursuit bill, 100%. We've got to raise our hand and say, this is not making Washington State safer, the law we passed. And we need to find that balance where, yeah, you want juveniles to feel like they have access to legal protection, but at the same time, we have to be able to, when they're the ones who saw what happened, and we are not allowed to get any information from the people who saw the crime so we can actually hold the criminal accountable. I mean, this is, and I'm really curious how we're gonna solve the whole, shooting in Garfield High School last week, given this law on the books. It's gonna make it hard, because a lot of the people who witnessed that were under the age of 18. And so this has to be fixed. Status quo cannot be accepted going forward.
Very good, I appreciate that. As governor, what policies would you support to ensure that violent extremism is not allowed to be used in connection with a range of issues? Because we're seeing that out there right now, including politics, religion, gender relations. And how would you support enforcement of the law to promote public safety so incidents of that type of extremist violence are not conflated with freedom of expression?
I'll just go back to the protests on the UW campus just, this spring. I saw President Anna Markowski come out, she was like, time is up, people, time to go home peacefully. And then what I saw from the elected officials in the state of Washington is crickets. I didn't hear a single person stand up to have her back. So I actually came out publicly and said, I agree with President Anna Markowski. The time is up. They should move away, because this is no longer just peaceful protest. This is crossing the line into anti-Semitism, and kids are nervous going to and from class, and it's time to have our elected leaders in our state show up and support people at the local level who are trying to do the right thing, not be worried about upsetting a far left extreme faction of our party, because you're actually showing support for the common sense policies. And I go back to Chop and Chaz. It could have been a very different outcome if you had someone in the governor's office who said, no, this is not going to be allowed. Like, we're going to work with you, City of Seattle, to fix what's happening right now, but we're not going to sit back and turn a blind eye and just pretend like there's nothing we can do. And I think this leadership is going to be really important going forward. And I tried to demonstrate it just this spring around these UW protests. And yeah, we need our leaders to speak up and really push back.
Well, the follow-up question to that is violent extremism a problem on both the left and the right? And should they be treated, whoops, no?
Look at that.
No worries.
Yeah, I know, user error.
So
talk about self-inflicted wounds.
So, but violent extremism on the left and the right, is it a problem on?
Yes.
Of course, okay.
I mean,
right.
we saw the one I'm referring to, the UW, was
right.
coming from the left,
right.
But we've obviously seen it from the right, and
right.
so this is a
okay.
issue that should be nonpartisan.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we just want to make sure, no matter which end it's coming from, that
right.
we have the same response. I think if I was to be critical in Washington, I think we're better at responding to violent extremism from the far right than we are at violent extremism from the far left.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where we can do better.
And if it's wrong, it's wrong. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Exactly.
Okay, thank you. One impediment to improving, this is a tough question. We work with our labor partners. As a longtime chief and sheriff myself, I view unions and labor as my partners. But the fact is too that one impediment to improving culture within agencies, law enforcement agencies, is sometimes the ability to discipline and terminate employees when necessary, recognizing due process for the employees. Very strong labor rights in our state sometimes make that difficult. Do you agree with that statement? And as governor, what would you do to improve that?
I agree with the statement. I think my wife's an elementary school teacher here in Issaquah, and I think they have the same frustrations in elementary school, where they see a teacher who's not holding their end of the bargain, and they want to fix it, and it's just hard in these situations. And I think you highlight correctly, we're a strong union state. Like, I voted for every single bill during my 12 years in the Senate to support the right to collectively bargain, because I do think it's an important fundamental right for our Washington residents. But you've got to find this balance, because you should never ever be using the right to collectively bargain to defend bad actors. And we have to, I think, find a way. This goes back to sort of how we solve that whole public drug use with Senate Bill 5536, you guys spend a lot of time listening to a lot of different voices to figure out how you're gonna find that middle ground, because my wife's experience at her school, the other teachers are probably the most upset when they see that bad apple not doing their job. And I think it's the same in any police department. When they see the bad apple, they want there to be accountability for that person more than anybody else does. And so we just have to figure out how we create a system where there's protections for workers so they're not treated unfairly, but that doesn't cross the line into becoming just defending bad actions. And there's no silver bullet solution to that. I can't, if there was one, I would tell you. I just think it's gonna be listening to both sides and admitting that this current system we have needs to be improved.
Yeah, and I key on your word balance there. There needs to be a balance. Last question, it's kind of a catch-all. Public trust continues to be a top priority for law enforcement. It has certainly been an issue for the last several years. What could you do as governor to promote public trust between communities, law enforcement agencies, and the officers who are out there to serve them? We talk a lot about problems and issues and frustrations, but law enforcement can't do the job without trust. We cannot do the job without trust. As governor, how would you bring that about? How would you increase that public trust involving law enforcement and the communities that sometimes have concerns?
There was an interesting article in the Seattle Times this morning by Danny Westney about the school resource officer at Garfield that they let go in 2020 as a result of this defund the police movement, unanimous vote by the Seattle School Board. I go back, I grew up in Tukwila. I went to Foster High School. That's a rough school. It's a rough neighborhood. And to me, it can start at that young age where you have a school resource officer in your school, and right away you can start to realize, oh, these are real human beings. They're actually looking out for me. They're not out to get me. They want to see me succeed. And so I think the fact that we went away from really investing in those school resource officers was a step in the wrong direction, and we have to revisit that. I mean, we'll never know with the whole Garfield shooting, but the guy who had been there for over a decade had built amazing relationships with that community, and he was let go. And if he had been there, I think it would have been a much better outcome for all those kids of how they view police for the rest of their life. And so I think there's an opportunity to go back to that. But it also, I look at, this is a sensitive topic, the Manuel Ellis trial. But we had a trial. And to me, it's important for the governor to speak up and say, we had a trial. Let's honor the result of what a jury of their peers actually said. Because my frustration was when that verdict came back and I saw one of those officers actually go to try to get a job, he couldn't even get a job in a different jurisdiction, even though he went through everything that we create in our criminal justice system. And he was cleared. And we speak really strongly in the legislature about people having second chances and all these other things, let alone if you haven't been convicted and you've been cleared, and to then still have that hanging over you, you need a governor who's gonna speak up and say, can we please respect the outcome, no matter which way it goes? Because at this point, I didn't see any political leadership from our current administration of actually showing respect for that process of how it played out, and I feel it actually cost him, that officer, the ability to have the employment he deserved to have in a different jurisdiction. And so I think there is a leadership vacuum there that can be filled, and that can go both ways, because who knows how the outcome's gonna go on these cases, but we need to make it clear, regardless of how the outcome goes, the governor should be supporting the final outcome.
And I'm hearing you say that if whatever way that trial or other trials go, supporting due process, supporting the system, supporting jurors' decisions, and then using that bully pulpit of the governor's office to lead on that issue. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I did not see it on this case.
Okay.
And I think if we had seen it, I think that officer would have been able to keep the job he found in the other jurisdiction. Right. And I feel leadership in the governor's office could have actually played a role in that.
Very good. I really appreciate it. That is the same questions we're going to ask each of the four, as I mentioned, top polling candidates for governor. And this is for awareness for the public, for public safety, and for a very important vote. First in the primary, August 6th, the general election on November 5th. And again, this segment is Senator Mark Mullet. He is a Democrat from Issaquah. And I will finish the way I will each of these four segments, which is to say thank you for your time, first of all, and secondly, thank you for being willing to serve as our governor and for your service. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.